I'm unmuting. I got a notification that we were live streaming and we're recording on Zoom as well. I can't see the chat on YouTube. So if anyone has any questions, you can share them in the chat and someone will reach out to me via Twitter, or you can get in touch with me on Twitter yourselves via CC Psychiatry, which is the official Twitter account for the Conference on Critical Psychiatry in 2023. Our theme is pluralism in anti-oppressive practice, and we have 2 days of conversations about the relationship between critical psychiatry and pluralism, probably. I'm moderating the second panel that we're viewing today. It's titled The Humanity, Art and Expression as Resistance. And we're looking at art, very broad term, as it relates to critique, which is one of the methodological interests of this conference, resistance, which is something that a lot of the organizers have been talking about, and co-optation, which has probably been implicit, but is also a really interesting term to have in our minds as we reflect on the fact that we are being hosted for real right now by Google. So do we oppose Google? Do we not? I hope that will not be the focus of this panel, because we are very lucky to be in conversation with 2 artists and Arnav Sethi, who is a current PhD student in social anthropology at the University of Cambridge. His studies focus on music therapy, and he plans to begin ethnographic fieldwork in Belgium this June. Arnav situates his work in the context of debates surrounding causation and treatment, as well as the conflation of verbal expression with emotional experience. Hi, how are you, Sethi? Dr. Sethi, Mr. Sethi.
Yeah, Mr. is just fine. Yeah, I'm just starting out my PhD. So yeah, hoping to be doctor.
Okay, you have like 3 years in Cambridge to become a doctor?
That's right. Yeah, hopefully 3 if it doesn't spill over to the 4th, which it usually does. Yeah.
Okay, good luck. And the artists that whose work we're going to learn something about are Nate Santana, who is a multimedia artist creating art, poetry, and music under the moniker Dead Society Poetry. You can find them on Twitter at Dead Soch, S-O-C, Poetry. Nate works with the themes of mental health, poverty, and reality. And we also have Chanika Svetvilis, who is an interdisciplinary artist and cultural worker. Their practice focuses on mental health difference and has been featured in public spaces like the Brooklyn Library, the Asian Arts Initiative, and also some scholarly venues like Disability Studies Quarterly and the Society for Disability Studies Annual Conference. So I wonder whether Ms. Svetvilis, you wouldn't mind sharing some of your images now.
Sure, I'll share my screen. Thank you for the introduction. So I wanted to start with a series I began during the pandemic. When we were under lockdown, everything was closed, but I was on Craigslist and I sourced this pile of paper from a elementary school teacher, and it's 3 feet by 2 feet, so 3 feet high, and it's the kind of paper you use to learn penmanship. So it has that blue dotted and blue solid line, and it's a little faint in the slide. But I called it my What I Have Learned series, fill in the blank, and so each one is titled differently. But when I was thinking about elementary school and my experience, I was thinking about what are the other things you learn besides in the classroom, which is also the socialization process. It's like, for me, it was one of my first exposures to racism. It's also about what do you need to unlearn after you've learned it. I wanted to start off with this series. So this is one of the first drawings I did during the pandemic, and I feel it's relevant prior to the pandemic as well. So it's called The Unchosen, and the multiple choice says choose one: health insurance, prescription meds, food, and rents. So I wanted to speak to the privilege of having a choice and also the limitations of the choice that are given us. Because, you know, if you have to just choose one, what are you left with, and what are you not able to access? So it's also about access. And I did these drawings in charcoal. And so content warning, I will be talking about my hospitalizations and my suicide attempt in this presentation. So please take care of yourself. So I use charcoal as medium because when I had a suicide attempt, I had swallowed 42 sleeping pills, and part of the process once I was hospitalized was being given activated charcoal, which absorbs the chemicals in your system after your stomach has been pumped. So I use charcoal as my chosen medium for this reason, and also because it's a transformative material, from solid form to this powdery burnt form. And also because it can't be contained. Like, I allow the smears and the smudges and the fingerprints to remain. And I'll just read these next ones. This one says, I crossed out all the words I did not agree with on the hospital admission form. The psychiatrist said, you can't sign it that way, and gave me another one. So these are based on my lived experiences. The next one is, the psychiatrist gave me a multiple choice test. After I returned it, he said, you cheated the test. Your answers can't be true. And the next one says, I asked my psychiatrist what his favorite color was, and he said, how is that relevant? So I really wanted to share what my experience was in entering the hospital, and my way of trying to resist that treatment by being able to try to exert my agency by crossing out words, by questioning, what is this relationship between the psychiatrist, who I'm asked to divulge my personal experiences, but I know nothing of the psychiatrists, and also questioning my own ability to answer questions and be believed. This is a larger drawing. This is about 6 feet by 5 feet tall with base 6 feet. And it's, what I did is I used prescription medication guides from Abilify, an antipsychotic that I take, and I blew it up on the photocopier and created a pattern with the photocopies. And then I overlaid the pattern with a pattern of a Thai graphic. So my heritage is Thai American. And then I also overlaid it with images such as exit, which is upside down and reversed. So I often, when exit is in my drawings, I have them reversed because I think about when I was under lockdown and I was on the other side of the exit. And then this drawing is called Diagnosis 296.44, which is the diagnostic number, the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual for Psychiatric Disorders manual. And then I have these sort of kapow, whams, these sort of comical expressions, which is meant to convey the violence of the treatment and interaction of the hospitalization. I also have the medical staff in there with the serpent. So I use different types of motifs to highlight the experience. And this one is a psychiatric rating scale that also has been blown up and collaged. I also use rice paste because rice paste was something I remember my mom used when she wrote letters to my grandmother. She would seal the letters with rice paste. And what you can't tell from the paper is that there was like a ripple effect from the water from the rice paste. And again, you can see the exit is reversed and upside down. This one is in the center is the Erawan, which is Thai mythological three-headed elephant. It's also a trademark of Erawan rice. I wanted to speak to consumerism of the medication and then consuming of the rice and consumption of culture. And then also the fact that in the 80s, the term consumer was used as the moniker, the euphemism for someone who uses psychiatric services. The idea of the consumer is the person with mental health differences that uses medication, uses psychiatric services, social services. But I always thought that was an odd term. It was a term I was exposed to when I was in Columbus, Ohio, because we're all consumers. So I just thought that was very odd. In this drawing, I also use sort of safety orange, which I used in the last one, in creating another pattern, like a caution kind of pattern. And again, with medication guides from Abilify that also highlights some of the side effects, as well as the contents of Abilify. And this is the last drawing I'll show. This is about 7 feet wide and about 4.5 feet high. And between all the gears is a portrait of Benjamin Rush, which is on the title page of the DSM, who is considered the founder of modern psychiatry. So the idea of being put and grind up in that system. And above it is a bent spoon. So disability justice is a community I identify with. And in disability communities, we often talk about the number of spoons we have in terms of the energy and having the number of spoons equaling, so to speak, the amount of energy we have at the moment. And there's also a bipolar neuron. The bipolar neuron is the neuron of the senses, the human senses. And on the lower left is the Naga water, mythological water figure. And then there's also a raven on the right. And I used a drawing from my niece that's clouds and sun. So the image was faxed to me. And so even though it was in color, it's in black, like the charcoal, like that's how I saw it. So idea of inverting that sunshine. And again, it has the safety orange as a pattern. And I like to use patterns because it's also about how like patterns of behavior, so the implication and the exertion of this force to try to make you conform to a specific pattern of behavior. And so that's why I like using charcoal, because it doesn't conform, it doesn't stay between the lines. It is messy, life is messy, and it's not meant to be contained. So it's my way of resistance. I also forgot to mention that there's handwriting of a journal entry by my mom, who passed away in 2019, of her experience visiting me in the hospital. So I like to layer images one on top of each other. And then a shameless promotion. This is, if you're interested in more information about my work, you can visit me on Instagram or my website. And I have an upcoming artist talk that's also virtual at Princeton University on Monday, April 17th at 4:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So I'll stop sharing my screen. Thank you.
And if anyone didn't have a chance to write that down, I think the tiny URL link to register for the talk is tinyurl.com/Chanika Svetvilas's full name, no, nothing between them. And that was amazing. Thank you very, very much. That was, I mean, we'll talk about what that was very soon. First, I guess let's learn something about Mr. Santana's work.
Hello, everyone. Just want to say thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you very much, Shanika. It was very powerful work. I wanted to share a piece from my City of Dreams collection. This is an audio-visual spoken word poetry project. It's very experimental. You could say avant-garde, whatever. But the inspiration for this project came from lived experience. I'm someone who grew up poor, in poverty in the Northeast United States, in the projects. You're surrounded by generational trauma. You're surrounded by insecurity, shame, ontological insecurity, or the insecurity in being in oneself, and also an inability to consume. And you're constantly bombarded with these things. So from that, I took inspiration again from my lived experience, but also observation of seeing the people that make up the city where I'm from, where you have people that are working extremely hard for a dream that is essentially opaque. They're sacrificing their mental health, their physical health in order to attain a dream or an escape that never really happens. And so I also take inspiration from Langston Hughes's poem, Harlem, where there's this famous line, dreams deferred. How do I share a screen on here? I'm sorry.
If you go down to the bottom with all the options, there's like a green button that says share screen.
Okay. Yeah, I see it. All right. Thank you very much. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So the piece that I'm going to share here is the second chapter in the City of Dreams. It is entitled WIC. WIC is a government assistance program. The full name is Women, Infants, and Children. And I grew up with all of these government assistance programs, SNAP, which is colloquially known as food stamps. Back in the day, you had stamps, you had actual like tangible like fiat currency that kind of differentiated you as a person dependent on government assistance from a regular person. So you were automatically othered. And so this piece also dives into Section 8, which is another government assistance program for housing. It's something that I was on for my entire childhood, all the way into my teens. But without further ado, I'm going to present this piece, and I'm not going to share too much else about it. I guess we could leave that up for interpretation. Here it is.
Nate, is there
Yes.
supposed to be more audio than what we're hearing? I hear something very, very, very thin, like sound.
Oh, yes, there is supposed to be there's supposed to be music playing
Oh,
as
there's
well.
supposed to be music. There's no music.
Interesting. Okay, so I'm not sure what to do then.
I think that's a good question. Are you on an Apple computer?
I'm on a PC.
You're on a PC. Okay, so I go on system settings. I think do you know where to configure individual apps in your, or you know what, if you go up to the top of your zoom.us, like to the bar at the top of the screen,
Mhm.
and you click on, oh, sorry.
Excuse me, Nika, maybe it would be easier if Nate, if you could just send the link, and if you're able to play it with sound, Nika, maybe you could play it and share your screen.
Sure.
Yeah, I'll do that right now. I'll send it in the chat.
Thanks. And while we're like taking a second for that, I just wanted to share some of the comments in the chat about the paintings and charcoal work and collage we saw earlier. This is amazing work, a work of art that truly speaks to the experience of being in the mental health care system. I love this piece. Someone else says, yes, another comment, love the play on consumerism. A heart from another viewer. And we also hear that Shanika's Instagram is another fantastic source of creativity, resistance, and madness. So you should check that out. And I'm going to share a YouTube video right now. We can hear it start playing. I'm sharing my screen. There we are.
I don't see anything.
Do other people not see anything?
I see the screen, but it's not playing.
Oh, it's playing for me.
Hi, everyone, this is Joseph sitting in the background. So if you are screen sharing and the audio isn't coming through, at the bottom left where you see the microphone, there's a small arrow. And if you click it, there should be an option to also share the audio as you screen share.
So, Mr. Santana, do you want to try again? Or should we like, okay, so I don't know. I feel, yeah, I think it's up to Mr. Santana if you want to try sharing again and like configuring the thing. Otherwise, when I screen share, I know the sound is coming through now. I'm seeing the video. So I think that we should just make sure right now that no matter what, everyone can access that YouTube video that's separate from the YouTube video we're streaming on right now, right? So it would be a backslash to get there. You would need to backslash at YouTube, watch, WATCH question mark, V equals, believe that's an L4044. So the code is L4WO1LU N, sorry, not N, 9. 7L, and then that's a capital L and that's a lowercase L. So if anyone is able to get that combinatorially, you are kind of a hero, some kind of crypto code. I want to make sure that we get that video out to everyone. We were going to play about the first 3 minutes. The video is 5 minutes and 39 seconds long. It was posted on YouTube 3 months ago, and it's a piece called Women, Infants, and Children, which is a means-tested government welfare program for poor and needy families. It operates on a voucher system with a set rationed list of food that includes cheese, milk, eggs, juice, meat, and grains. Many poor families that I'm still quoting, reading, you should be able to see it. Many poor families that are on WIC are also on SNAP, colloquially known as food stamps. This piece is an avant-garde visual and musical poetic exploration into the shame, anxiety, and insecurity associated with poverty and resilience connected to these government programs. I'm going to stop. Well, I don't know. So I guess when I move my cursor through the video, are you able to see different stills? Okay. And when I play, you're not able to see anything?
You can play now and see.
Okay.
Sunny side up, sunny side up. Breakfast. Lunch, eggs, dinner, eggs, rice, red, white, eggs, cheese, cheese, eggs. You got a dinner. One that we all rice with milk. Snap, snap, snap. I want that. Snap, 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 snap. So,
I couldn't hear the audio.
Couldn't hear the audio?
No, it was very muffled, and the only thing that came through was the vocals, but barely. But it's okay. And if everyone has the link, they could definitely go in and watch it.
I'm so sorry about those technical problems. We're recording on Zoom in addition to streaming on YouTube through an open source software that's permitting us to be in a Zoom room and sharing on YouTube at the same time. And we're on different devices right now. So I'm on something made by Apple and you're on something made by Microsoft. And so all of these companies are like friends everywhere in the world. But when it comes to like users being able to have like a good experience with each other across the software. I'm getting a text that someone could hear the audio. Could you share something about the materials that you used to make the video?
Yeah, so I used for the sound, I used an electric piano / MIDI controller. I used both GarageBand, I used Adobe Audition, and I used BandLab. Those are things that I use for recording music. I also used a lot of actual AI generated imagery that I then superimposed on top of each other through Premiere Pro. So there was a lot of what they call prompt engineering. And then I also choreographed the words using Adobe After Effects. The words and the letters and the phrases. So that's pretty much it when it comes to the process and the materials used to create this piece. Other pieces use filmography. So I'm out in Harlem, in New York City, or in Connecticut or New Jersey, and I'm out. Essentially, the whole world is my canvas, and I'm recording people in their candid nature. And I also play all the instrumentation, whether that is piano, clarinets, saxophone, drums, whatever it is. I make all the music and I make all the visuals, and edit everything all myself. But again, the story that's the most important thing for me, is telling the story, and telling a story that is about myself, but also about my family, and also about people that live in poverty in the US. There's a lot of undiagnosed, neuroses, if you will, right? Undiagnosed mental health in these communities, in Black and Brown communities. But yeah, that's the most important thing for me, is telling this story. And so, yeah.
Mr. Sethi, could you comment on, I think we have two really interesting examples here of how to approach one of the questions that some of the organizers shared in advance on, how this panel is about whether art has the potential to capture madness, and so what the potential of art could be in a critical discourse. Miss Svedvilas's, and I'm so sorry, I keep feeling like I'm mispronouncing your name, work centers lived experience. It's very explicit. She's very explicit about how she does that. And Mr. Santana is also centering a lived experience of poverty, and engaging with the issue of mental health from a more critical perspective. How do you think these works aren't in conversation with each other?
Yeah, thank you very much. I'd just like to thank you, Nika, as well, for the generous introduction, and also, of course, to Alma and Joseph for sort of organizing the panels. And yeah, it was like extremely sort of moving for me as well, to see both Chanika and Nate's work. So thank you so much for that. It's really moving and very poignant. Yeah, I would just like to sort of begin my contribution to this in the sense that I just started a PhD within the anthropology of psychiatry, and my work sort of focuses on psychiatric music therapy and sort of the conversations around that between both therapists and psychiatrists. Yeah, and I also train in Indian classical vocal music myself, so I'm also a sort of semi-professional musician myself. But to really come back to your question, and I think more sort of specifically to address the sort of title of the panel. The title actually is The Humanity, Art and Expression as Resistance. And so I'd like to sort of approach that question by thinking about what it is really about contemporary psychiatry and the state of mental health care across the world that sort of needs to be resisted in this way, in the way in which we are seeing through the way in which the speakers before me shared their really moving artwork. So I think this question, of course, is being answered in sort of different ways through this conference, but just to sort of specifically focus on the fact that sort of the way in which mainstream mental health care is imagined in terms of discrete sort of diagnostic labels. And this is, I think, something that Chanika also, I think, sort of alluded to. And one of the most important questions that sort of comes out there for me is this whole, the way in which psychiatrists or clinicians might sometimes sort of annul the speech or the testimony of patients. And this is like a crucial sort of social process that is sort of entailed in arriving at a diagnosis itself. So in order to arrive at a diagnosis and to have like a disease category or like a diagnostic label, this process of annulling the patient's speech is sort of crucial to the work of psychiatry itself. And so I'm just thinking about the ways in which like this can be resisted through art, and what exactly do I mean by this sort of resistance that we saw in the sharing of the work before I spoke. And so I'm just thinking here about this whole question of overusing DSM categories and disease labels, in the sense that they sort of tend to foreclose any alternative possibilities of self-expression. And that is where I see the role of art as sort of the most important, because and I know that this panel is the point was to not make it very academic. So, but I'm sorry to just not cite exactly, but just bring to light some anthropological work in this field, because there is some work now about like this pervasive overuse of disease labels like psychotic or paranoid schizophrenic, bipolar manic, and all of these sort of deeply stigmatizing disease labels, and the ways in which these sort of prevent people from acknowledging the importance actually of exploring, identifying, and sort of defining their own inner states. And this, I think, is really what the work of art really enables, this sort of process of constructing subjectivities, constructing alternative subjectivities, which do not necessarily fuse patients' identities entirely with their diagnostic labels. And there's also work on how, where in cultures where diagnostic labels like schizophrenia are overused, clinical outcomes might actually be worse than cultures in which these disease labels are not so prominent, even though like symptom experiences might be similar. So I think like I see the sort of work of art to resist these diagnostic labels and the pervasive overuse of these DSM categories. And this is, of course, this is important because it enables patients to sort of construct, as I said, subjectivities and also selfhood in alternative sort of modes of expression. And that is what I think is the most important work that art sort of enables. I'll just limit my comments to that and maybe come back to some of it. Yeah.
Thank you. I wonder what you made of the kind of issues we were seeing with, I mean, I guess that this is a double-pronged question, or this is my kind of take, and then I would love to hear what you think. The issues we were experiencing with like the sound and the like video in the second screen share. Your work focuses specifically on music therapy, or that's what you have written in your biography. I wanted to kind of find a way to connect Miss Vetvilas's work, which is on paper and it's not multimedia. It's very, very traditional in its materiality. To a recent presentation I heard about the Black Sonic Archive. So particularly about like it came out of NYU, I think, a new book. And it was like, at least to me, making an argument about how if we're like sourcing the kind of Western canon to the Gutenberg archive, a kind of a source of like a real avenue for resistance would be to think about like the history of jazz, orality in the like African American tradition as an antidote. So how would the nature of like an error, like a technical error, and I really want to kind of emphasize that what we saw was an error and not something like a glitch, because you know, we easily could have like not like streamed recorded the Zoom on top of like the YouTube recording and the live stream. Like when you layer on too many things with tech, the hardware just like start like kind of automatically starts resisting. So that would be our error. And it's kind of a, like, I would argue like a creative error or a fruitful error, because we can, you know, in an academic space, analyze it and ask like what we learned. How did the work, but where's the work in that? Like, why is that why is that? Why does that come down to like an argument about, or like a point about, you know, an Apple computer versus a Windows computer, and suddenly it feels like the work isn't the center of the conversation. How can we address that?
Yeah, thank you for that. That's, of course, it's a really challenging one. But no, I think based on what you're saying about the nature of the technical error, and you sort of emphasize that that was an error. And if we sort of extend that to the realm of art and sort of understand how artistic error might be both constraining as well as enabling in some sense, because it might sort of foster possibilities for improvisation. And a lot of my work is actually on, so a lot of like clinical music therapy is improvisational, both between in terms of interaction between both therapist and patient. So I mean, I think the important thing there is about what Nate sort of, I think, ended his presentation with, that the fundamental question really is about telling stories. And I think like that's also something that came out in Chanika's presentation as well. So, and I also think that there is like a tendency in the psychiatric literature and psychiatric discourses to sort of make this argument that patients, particularly those diagnosed with psychotic disorders, are sort of unable to construct narratives, particularly in the form of sort of verbal expression. And which is where I think there is like immense sort of possibility to see narrative framings in the ways in which that we just saw in the video and in Chanika's presentation, in the sense in which we sort of get a sense of a sort of temporally coherent narrative, which sort of psychiatric diagnosis would tell us that is not really in the form of verbal expression. It doesn't usually sort of take place, and diagnoses are made on the basis of that sort of diminished verbal expressivity. So if I might just sort of point towards this, that so several sort of commentators have made this point about like this sort of linkages between madness and artistic production and creativity. And the one important one I think interesting is to look at, like, I think something that you were also mentioning before we started streaming, about like notable poets who had psychotic symptoms, so to say. And so I think the interesting one is the German poet Hölderlin, and I read some of the work there, and how his sort of literary expression over time sort of became really, it became like a problem for him to express verbally, and how he sort of wrote the spiritual and the linguistic quality of his poetry actually, some say, sort of improved, but this was like really profoundly sort of spiritual and meaningful poetry that he was writing even at like the apex point of his sort of psychotic illness. So I think, yeah, and which is where I think like that's an important example to look at the role of art and the role of improvisation and the role of sort of creativity and how it enables us to think about constructing stories in alternative mediums of expression. I don't know if I'm directly answering your question, but
no, that's a very direct answer. I mean, I really want to give the artists a chance to respond. I see that we have a very interesting question in the chat about the importance of dance, the relevance of dance. I just want to draw a connection here between the kind of multimedia, so Mr. Santana's work was primarily visual, we could say, like Miss Svedvilas's. Would you agree with that, Mr. Sethi?
Sorry, could you repeat that? I didn't follow.
So like the kind of primary characteristic of the work that we saw was visual, right? Would you say? So visual rather than set textual, like Hölderlin's. And so dance, I personally, and you should kind of contradict me if you wish, I would kind of group with the kind of visual forms, which may like each have their own like unique histories, particularly music. I think we really have to like kind of put music in this conversation somewhere near the ceiling, but to see how both textual and visual forms are incorporating it. Visual forms can incorporate it through computational multimedia like video, or even or in the case of dance by live accompaniment. Textual work can incorporate music through harmony, rhythm, the concept of voice. That's also kind of key to a lot of contemporary literary fiction. I think that, you know, you can even imagine how, to me, Miss Vetbilis's work like was conjuring up like sounds almost. Like I didn't literally hear them, but like the paper, the way that the camera was capturing the like materiality, the texture of the paper, I could almost imagine it crinkling. So I was gonna ask some kind of, but like none of that is about story. So none of that is about like positionality. None of that is about personal experience. Like we see how the personal experience is kind of framing this conversation, creating an ability for us to like get to know each other and to showcase the material. I mean, the stuff that they're making. Like I almost want to say it's like money, but it's not getting printed by the Federal Reserve. It's getting made by human beings. So I think like when I hear clinicians kind of ask for narrative and ask for the person to be centered, I want to push back and say like, what's your story? Like, so how is what you're doing art? Like, why are you? Why would you? How would you be qualified to talk about art at the level of production, at the level of its like mechanics?
Yeah, is that to me? Yeah. Okay.
Or I would open it up here, and I mean and we have to get out of here at 2:15, and so I would really, I mean, yeah, I'm hearing from Joseph in the Zoom chat, but yeah, I mean, I guess my real question for the artists, I mean, that question was for you, or that was like a charge to you in your work, but my question for the artists is more related to that issue of textuality and like the visual work in relation to music. So when and how is visual art textual?
Yeah, I can probably just address like the one that was directed to me, but yeah, I mean, I do want to make sort of clear that I'm not saying what I am based on like being a clinician, because I am not a clinician. I'm training to be a medical and psychiatric anthropologist. But of course, I do intend to work with both patient populations and clinicians. But I think yeah, the important thing about what you were mentioning about the visual medium in Chanika's presentation is, I think the one thing that struck me is what I think what Chanika really said about the use of patterns, and so sort of the ways in which those visual patterns depicted certain patterns of behavior or represented certain patterns of behavior. And the example of charcoal really sort of struck out there, because charcoal, as she said, doesn't sort of conform and is like sort of it's like exemplifies resistance in the best way in some sense. And so I'm just thinking about like some of my work with, I mean, I didn't have public
But
consent.
it also stains the fingers when you draw with it. So like, I mean, just to think about that process, like from the artist's perspective, like you've gone through this, like first, like gone through the traumatic experience that leads to the wish to take your life. Then you go through the treatment, or like whatever they're calling the treatment, which involves ingesting this thing and then drawing with it. Like, and then your hands get dirty and then you go wash them. Like, that is something like, what is psychiatric about that?
Yeah, I think maybe we should ask the artist what is psychiatric about it.
I just wanted to say that Stephanie Height, who's a writer and poet, she wrote this wonderful essay in Mad in America about how her mental health difference of bipolar can also be a discipline, in the sense that, you know, you also, with your lived experience, you are the expert of your own experience, and that for me, I'm also bipolar. I do also see it as a discipline, in that it can be generative in terms of how I choose to create the work. Like, I don't have the steadiest hand because of side effects from the medication. I am not trying to create a perfect image, because that's not the way I see my life. You know, I want to embrace the messiness, embrace the mistakes. I don't use an eraser usually. I allow the mistakes to be. I allow things to look imperfect, because that is a part of the experience. And in my sculpture, I use prescription bottles, and they're often distorted. And I create work with it using like gold paint and gold leaf to echo kintsugi, which is the Japanese practice of amending broken pottery with platinum or gold, or that, of course I don't use real, but the idea is that you're embracing the history of the object, and that the breakages are actually beautiful. So I like to see my work that way, in the sense that it can show this mental health difference in a way that embraces the experience.
I want to echo what you're saying. For me, my art is a lot of it is unedited. A lot of it is dirty. It's raw, and a lot of it is improvised. And I like that sort of methodology, because to me, any sort of structure is a form of oppression. Even if it is a discipline or something that you know, we're taught to be structured in order to be productive, in order to be like quote unquote good citizens, in a sense. And I try to live my life away from being contrarian to all those things that to me feel, to use that word again, oppressive. So I do want to say that I really resonate with what you're saying. I think being improvisational, being dirty in a sense, you know, the charcoal staining your hands, staining the paper. I think there's a certain beauty in that, and I also think that right there, and as you said earlier, is resistance. You know, that like improvisational, chaotic sort of nature is a resistance to the structure, the oppressive force of institutionalized structure. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. I really agree with what you're saying.
Thank you.
Mr. Sethi, do you have more questions?
No, I mean, yeah, no, that was really interesting. No, I just wanted to also just add to something that I think, again, Chanika mentioned, and just to come back to what I was saying about the sort of patterns and the way in which like the artwork is representing certain patterns, and as like a form of resistance as well. If I could just sort of briefly mention how non-verbal modes of expression, like we just saw through the visual medium, but also like in my work with music therapists, I wasn't able to share some of the work because I don't have public consent to sort of share it publicly. So I'm just sort of thinking about this question of when one moves into the realm of music and sort of away from the spoken or the verbal, really, it can sort of be seen that there are certain sort of framings, like narrative framings. I don't mean narrative in the sense of like an overarching structure in the way in which Nate just described, that we're trying to sort of resist overarching structures. But I do think that there is like immense possibility in non-verbal modes of expression to access narrative framings. And I think that is important also to sort of speak back to because critical discourse does need to sort of engage with the cognitive and epistemic categories of psychiatry itself. And if we do want to sort of make a very meaningful kind of critique to these overarching sort of diagnostic labels and processes, really. So I do think that when one moves into the realm of music, I find that in some of the sort of poetic expressions and also musical sort of music making of a lot of the clients that I've not witnessed in person, but sort of the recordings that I've heard, there does seem to be like a interesting pattern of notations there, which are constructed by clients themselves. So there's like a recurrent pattern that, so the question of improvisation is like really important there, because on the one side, clinicians might annul verbal speech and like wouldn't really get into like questions of subjectivity probably, if and might actually even diagnose people on the basis of narrative incompetence, really, through verbal expression. But if one looks at like the creations of clients who work with like music therapists, then so I find like there is like some kind of sort of there's like a coherent like temper in terms of temporality. There is like a coherent way in which they sort of create musical notations that move away from a certain pattern, but it's sort of like a refrain, and they'll come back to like a certain set of notations again and again. So there's like a sense of there is like some kind of temporal coherence to the music making, which I think is really interesting for me, which for clinicians might not come out in verbal speech. But if one looks at these sort of musical improvisations of these clients, and I'm saying clients and not patients for a reason, is because like so that's what I think, like it's really sort of enables a rethinking of diagnostic criteria as well at some level. Yeah.
I really like that. I think it's, you're creating a new sort of language, a new identity. You're just, I always think of like Franz Fanon, whose work is really near and dear to my heart. But you're creating a new identity constantly, and you're doing that through improvisational creation, whether it is through painting, whether it is through music. But what you just said really was I love what you just said. It's the creation of new languages outside of, because language in itself can be very oppressive, especially like hegemonic language, a language that is imposed on individuals from kindergarten all the way through their entire life course. So creating our own language, creating our own methods of expression is cathartic, is a way for us to be seen, I guess, normal in a way. But yeah, definitely. I always try to bring new methodologies in terms of expressing myself within music, or whether it is through video art. With whether it's like a note that is misplaced or a note that is played on top of another note that shouldn't be there. I'm still, I feel like that right there, whatever it is that comes out is right, because it came from me as a sort of cathartic expression. And that right there is resistance. It's resistance from all the things that oppress us, whether that is language, whether that is DSM diagnoses that are created by elites, institutional, ruling class people. Resistance is the thing that is the driving force. Expression, catharsis, all these things are the driving force for many artists, especially me.
So that was really powerful. I am so happy we had a chance to talk about reimagining diagnostic categories. Thank you so much to both of you, Ms. Vetvilas and Mr. Santana, for creating work that enabled that conversation. It was really a pleasure to have a chance to use language with both of you, and even with you, Mr. Seppi. I think that my one pushback could have something to do with a view of art, the history of art as a fundamentally like narrative. As something that I've received as a narrative. So the way that pictures have changed over time, I receive as a language, the way that words work in relation to each other are much more figurative for me. Those two things. So just that those concepts don't have to be opposed to each other. You know, I think that integrating language with collage and stuff is really cool. And actually, Mr. Santana, you did do that, as we saw. I recently saw work that by Monica Ong that was visual poetry, Miss Vetvilas, that was like displayed at the Poetry Foundation in Chicago. And it, it was much glossier, the surface, and but it used words in a pretty interesting way in relation to the constellation. And yeah, it's just, I would love to know more about, if you have a chance to look at her work, how your pieces are and aren't in dialogue. And in the meantime, I know we have to clear out this Zoom room for the next panel. So unless there are final words, I'm just going to say thank you. And yeah, and I hope everyone follows Ms. Vetvilas' Instagram and Santana on Twitter. Thanks so much. Bye.